Get Certified Together program is created by Technocofe, your free online knowledge sharing website, based out in London.
In what kind of information we have to consider as private, and what is difference between a contractual private information and regulated private information. There are a lot of fancy words here in this subtopic, but let's first understand what is PII, or personal identifiable information. Now PII you will hear a lot of times when you are in information security, cyber security, cloud security. PII is used quite extensively.
Whether you're walking barefoot in the snow, escaping for a walk on your lunch break, or trekking halfway across the world for a lush view, it feels good when we unplug and connect to our simpler side. If only our everyday nutrition were that simple. It's time to simplify your wellness routine with Kachava. Getting the nutrition we need from that graveyard of supplements in our cupboards is often overcomplicated. Just 2 scoops of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake, and you've got 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and so much more. Plus, it actually tastes delicious. No fillers, no nonsense. Just the good stuff your body craves. So instead of adding to your backstock of supplements that overpromise and underdeliver, keep it simple with just 2 scoops that have the highest quality ingredients. Simplify your nutrition at Kachava.com and use code NEWS. New customers get $20 off an order of 2 bags or more, now through January 31st. That's Kachava, Kachava.com, code NEWS.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Certified Together series. This is episode number 47 I'm recording today, and unfortunately this episode is coming after a good gap of 2 months. Now in episode 46 itself I mentioned that I will be going on the vacation, so I went for it. It was a good time with family on a Easter break. When I came back, I was in post-vacation handover, so I was not really in that mood of recording or uploading anything. When I started to get in the moment and when I started compiling my older notes and I was in plan of releasing episode 47, I got hay fever. Now hay fever, if you are not from this part of world or this is something you never heard before, even I am hearing it for the first time, is kind of situation when you're allergic to pollen grains, which I was not so far because I never faced them. But because I was facing them for the first time in my life, I find out that I am actually allergic to pollen grains. So I was actually having all those red eyes, cough and cold situation, and it actually took around 2 to 3 weeks for me to get recovered from that situation. Finally, after getting recovered from all of those things, I wrote everything down what I have to cover, created my short notes in my diary, so what topics I have to speak on today, and of course I started back on my CCSP journey. So if you guys are actually following the whole series and if you guys are still going into that journey and your goal is clear like me, then of course I'm sorry for that, but I gave us some good time to actually recharge and re-energize. And trust me, we haven't deviated from the path. It is still our goal, and this is something we want to achieve in this year. So in 2024 we have a target which is CCSP, and we will be able to achieve it, don't worry. For the CCSP itself, like I mentioned, that we have actually completed till domain 5 and we were into domain 6 from the previous episode. So first topics of domain 6 was started and I did cover some of them. I recall when I was editing my previous episode, I sort of thought that e-discovery bit is something which I haven't covered properly, and maybe I didn't make those that e-discovery concept itself pretty clear, and it was sounding like pretty confusing, and so I thought of covering it back today. And of course we start with the next few subtopics of the domain 6. Domain 6 is the last one, so once domain 6 is over, it's upon us how we want to proceed. So either we have kind of like a revision session where we will be going with all the domains and all the subtopics and topics again, but in pretty crux and pretty short manner. That's one way forward. Or second way forward is we can even try to get hold of some kind of sample papers and sample examination, and we can discuss about those question and answer as well. So that's the plan. Another idea which I had, bringing on the guests. So this is something which I promised a lot of times, but unfortunately because I don't have a proper studio of myself, I'm still recording from my car garage, so I don't have that kind of like infrastructure and background so far. But I have probably a good big news coming in next 2 months. I don't want to make it official, but if everything fall into the place, then we probably will be having a better studio environment when I will be moving things around a bit. That's the plan. Means I have a lot of ideas once domain 6 is over and our whole CCSP syllabus is covered, so how we want to proceed before the examination. Another key point we can start thinking of now is when we should book the exam. So for me, I was actually planning to book somewhere between June mid, somewhere around that, but I will be postponing it because like I mentioned, something big is happening for the next 2 months and I'll be probably busy in that direction. So I have postponed it a bit, and I will be now taking exam somewhere around July and or August 1st or 2nd week. But what I'm thinking is, in order to avoid further delay, I will be booking the exam itself now, so at least I have a target with me. I think this is a good opportunity for you guys as well. You can maybe start zeroing on the dates, on the month at least, when you want to give the exam. If you have funds with you, if you can book it now, then I think you should go ahead, because it will give you guys a target as well. If not, at least make kind of like a soft target and create some kind of date in your mind, so you can start targeting that. By then you have to take the exam. So different people actually have different ways, and for me, I think it's better that I should allocate a date itself, so it will be easier for me to plan out my next steps forward and how I want to proceed and how I want to move on personally for taking the exam. But the CCSP series and this podcast series will continue as it is, and all the topics and all the domains will be covered as I have promised it before. Alright, before moving into today's episode, it's time for a quick short break, and after the break we can continue with our domain 6 journey. Hi, welcome back. So for domain 6, legal risk and compliance, today we will start with the next subtopic, which is understanding privacy issues. Now, before going to this subtopic, I mentioned that I have to cover a few bits around e-discovery, which was part of previous subtopic. So when I was actually listening to my episode 46 recording, I realized that the way e-discovery, when I explained it, it sounded like this is something related to or something similar to when we discuss about discovering or when we discuss about cloud forensics, where someone had to analyze all the document or someone had to understand what kind of things are going in and out inside an organization. They have to read all the documents, they have to read all the data transmitted in and out, ingress egress going, so that you can have some kind of like assessment and some kind of forensics which you can do based on some kind of like incident if something is reported, or if someone want to audit your setup. So e-discovery actually sounded like that, but e-discovery is slightly different in a manner, because e-discovery also cover those emails which you are sending in and out. So for example, I mentioned in the previous episode as well that various cloud service provider and CSPs, they have their own solution of e-discovery. What I mean by that is, for example, Office 365. It's a well-known solution by Microsoft which covers a hell lot of things. It covers SharePoint, it covers emails, even covers OneDrive. So all the data you are storing, all the mails you are sending in and out, everything is happening via a single solution. Now, Office 365 itself have its own e-discovery solution, which help in even analyzing the mails which are going in and out, and what kind of communication is happening between different organizations or between different people within an organization. So e-discovery is slightly different than your basic cloud forensics, where you are actually analyzing the documents based on incident. E-discovery actually covers a slightly different information and slightly different way of analyzing the documents, analyzing the mails, and analyzing the messages. So that's what I want to just let you know, guys, before we move on to today's topic, because I don't want you guys to get confused between cloud forensics or normal digital forensics with e-discovery. Those are completely two different things. All right, so for today's topic, let's start with privacy issues. Now, before we go deep into what kind of like privacy issues are there and what kind of information we have to consider as private and what is difference between a contractual private information and regulated private information, there are a lot of fancy words here in this subtopic, but let's first understand what is PII, or personal identifiable information. Now, PII you will hear a lot of times when you are in information security, cyber security, cloud security. PII is used quite extensively. Even in the news, day-to-day news, we hear terms like PII got leaked. So PII got leaked means personal information got leaked. Now, everything is not personal information. You still have to consider PII is the only information which anyone can use to identify a particular individual. Now, me myself, if I am from India, I am an Indian, that's not really a PII because that's my nationality, and there are a lot of Indians everywhere. There are a lot of Americans, Australians. That's not a PII. But my name, my gender, and my date of birth, my social security number, they are PII because they can clearly identify who am I. If one of them is not clear enough, for example, like gender is not clear enough, you can combine 2 or 3 informations together to easily identify about whom we are talking about. So PII is something which if got leaked or which if someone gets hand on, they can easily identify who this individual is. And that's why, of course, it's really important to secure that information, to keep it as safe as we can. Another term we normally use is PHI, which is protected health information, which actually cover information related to an individual about the health. So for example, what's their blood group is, what kind of disease or someone is having, or what kind of insurance that particular person is using, what kind of diagnostic have been done on a particular person or a particular family. All those are covered under PHI, and PHI and PII both are quite relevant and both need to be confidential. You really don't want people to know what kind of disease or what kind of ailment you are suffering from. This is something, it's your personal, unless you yourself share with someone, you don't want people to know about it unless you give consent to that. So that's why PHI and PII both are quite confidential and quite close to someone, and they shouldn't be revealed as it is. But because everything is now digital, people are using their application, their mobile phones, you have to store some information onto the application, you have to store some information onto the mobile phone, on your laptop. And when we started about this CCSP and cloud security journey, what we understand as key basic knowledge, nothing is stored locally. Everything is stored on someone else's server, which is managed by someone else. If your application, your health app, your government's official health app even is running on some cloud or is running on some server. So your information which you are feeding in, your date of birth, your weight, height, everything, they are actually stored somewhere. And we need to make sure that those information are secure and those information stay confidential. So let's start with contractual and regulated personal information. Contractual personal information or contractual PII is bound with a contract. If you are a client or if you are a customer who is hosting an application onto the cloud, you are binding your cloud service provider with some kind of contract that this personal information will be secured in this particular manner. And if there is a breach in security, if something goes wrong, you can complain to that CSP, you can even sue them, because this is something which leads to break of a contract. So when you created a contract with your service provider or when you created the contract with your customer, if something goes wrong, you can actually complain to them, you can actually fine them, you can actually sue them according to a contract, which is slightly different from the regulated PI. In case of regulated PI, not only there is a contract is always there, but the person or application or the service provider who is keeping the information secure is also bound to follow certain regulations. So for example, we discussed about GDPR, HIPAA, all those regulations need to be followed as well. And if something goes wrong, not only there is a breach in contract, so you're liable to pay the fine, you're liable to for a court case, you also will be having kind of like a government inquiry or an official criminal or civil case on you. So regulated PII or regulated contract are much more bigger, much more serious in terms of offense if something goes wrong with your data. When some individual is storing your data on your application which is hosted on cloud, something goes wrong, not only that individual can sue you, they can even take you to the courts. And in that case, even government will come into picture, because your CSP or your cloud service provider, application service provider, they broke a certain regulation as well. So that's the key difference between contractual and regulated PII. Now, when we talk about storing information onto the cloud, remember one of the key features of the cloud was it was geolocated. You can have one information or one data center onto different locations all over the world, and that actually creates a lot of complexity. Means we have discussed in things like how you will identify where your data is stored, what kind of regulations you will put into that information, because every country have their own country specific laws and country specific regulations. So we really have to consider and discuss that country specific PII regulations here now in this subtopic as well. Now, when we talk about country specific regulations, I think the first and foremost which comes into our mind is GDPR, which is in EU, and any EU citizen, any European Union citizen will be having that GDPR applied to him or her, and information is always stored based on that GDPR regulation. Even if the company which is operating outside of EU, but they are storing the information or personal information of an EU citizen, they have to follow that GDPR regulations to their country as well. Now, GDPR is of course followed in European Union. We have covered extensively about GDPR in previous episodes, where I mentioned that it is quite extensive, and any individual can sue the organization. They have consent and they have full rights to be forgotten, so they can ask the company or ask the organization, ask the application provider to delete their data. If something goes wrong, they can, like I mentioned, they can sue in the court. There are a lot of heavy penalties, a lot of heavy offenses being charged onto that organization. Now here I want to bring something that between UK and EU and Ireland, standard is common related to storing PII. So they follow the similar standard like GDPR. However, any non-EU or non-Europe country, they still have to require consent from the user. So for example, if I am in United Kingdom and my data is stored in some African countries or some application which is hosted in maybe Australia, they have to take consent of me before storing my information in their server. If I am citizen of these countries, EU, UK and Ireland, I fully compliant with GDPR, and if my information is stored somewhere, only when I give my consent, my information will be stored there and my information will be used in those countries. Now, US itself, privacy is kind of like not that extensively used or considered in terms of normal laws and regulations which are quite prevalent in US. But HIPAA is one thing which is quite regularly monitored and is a big regulation in terms of health sector in the United States. HIPAA actually covers all those PHI or health information which I mentioned, and those need to be treated and those need to be secured quite safely, and they need to be confidential always. So HIPAA is one of the privacy law which US have. Another one is GLBA, which actually cover your financial information. If you are a US citizen and your financial data is stored in some bank or some application server, then they have to follow the GLBA guidelines or GLBA regulations. Now, of course, when we are talking about these so many privacy requirements and how we have to make sure that all the data which we are storing onto the cloud, they remain secure and they remain confidential, there are of course a lot of standards. Means we have already covered difference between standards and regulations. So just now I mentioned GDPR, HIPAA, they all are regulations and they are laws. But there are some standards as well which help in providing a nice framework to any organization, how they want to keep the data secure, how they can keep the data confidential, how they can maintain the data integrity and availability. So there are a lot of frameworks. One of the most commonly used framework is ISO27018. So it covers privacy aspects of cloud customer. 27018 is a component of 27001. ISO 27001 is generic framework which cover a lot of components and a lot of solutions, a lot of different types of deployment. 27018 is specifically for cloud. Now, I'll not go into detail of what actually is covered under 27018. I don't think that's a requirement from CCSP side, but at least to give you a bit of idea like what kind of things will be covered inside it. So we have consent, which is of course like a key thing. Only if I give consent to any organization or any application or any CSP, then only they can keep the data and they can store it somewhere. If I'm not giving consent, they shouldn't be allowed to keep it. Beside consent, control of data is really important. Who is controlling your information? Who is in control of the data you are storing? Is it the application provider? Is it the CSP? Or you as an individual or as a customer? Can you control the data? Can you delete it yourself and it will be gone forever from the application server or from the CSP, wherever they are storing it? So who is actually controlling the data? Data control is quite extensively covered in 27018. Beside that, of course, auditing and communication. So if something goes wrong, how the information is communicated to everyone. If there is a data hack inside a CSP bucket, who is responsible for communicating it to the customer, and who is actually responsible for auditing the whole setup regularly, because audit is something which we will cover in today's topic as well, which is a big tool when you want to analyze what kind of solution you have deployed and how you can make it much better, how you can follow those standards and guidelines so that you can make it more secure, more regulated. Beside ISO 27018, we also have GAP, which is generally accepted privacy principles, and it includes principles like consent, access, retention, security. So most of the topics or most of the principles or most of the guidelines are same as like ISO 27018, but you have another option of using this standard or this framework as well if you want to, like I mentioned, if you want to make your organization more secure, more better in terms of storing of information. Moving on to next topic, which is around understanding of audit process, methodologies, and adaptations for cloud environment. Let's begin with auditing. Audits are nothing but review of your whole solution, how you have deployed that solution, what kind of design have been applied, have you followed a well-architected framework, have you put all those industry or enterprise grade solutions in your design, how you are storing the data, how you are onboarding new customers, or how you are onboarding new information onto the cloud or onto the solution which you are using. So everything is analyzed, everything is reviewed as part of audit process. Audit itself can be internal or external. Now, what's the difference between those two? Internal audit is normally carried out by one of the designated team which is part of your existing organization, but they are still independent. They don't report directly to your existing IT manager, or they are not even under the CTO, who is technically owner of whole technical solution which is deployed onto the cloud or onto the on-prem environment. So there is normally no kind of like a conflict of interest, and this independent internal audit team will review the internal solutions, will review the whole organization, both in terms of technical as well as managerial and process wise as well, like what kind of procedure you are using or what kind of processes you have, how you are dealing with some kind of incident, what kind of strategy you have in place for your business continuity and disaster recovery. Everything is covered, everything is audited as part of this internal audit team, and they will create a nice review, a nice audit document which will be presented to all kind of like higher management level members, and they can then decide like what kind of implementation or what kind of suggestions you can do to improve the things and to make it more closer to those standards and to those frameworks which we discussed just now. Now, since internal audits are part of internal organization and they are done by someone who is part of your organization, your team, they give a continuous improvement chances. So they are not like you are bringing some external auditors and they will come once in a year and they will give some suggestions or they will suggest some improvements. It's not like that. For internal audit, it's a continuous exercise. You can run it all over the whole like financial year and they will give you continuous suggestions related to improvements. So it's quite beneficial in a way to have regular internal audits. They can help in continuously improving the whole solution and whole design. External audits have wider scope. They assess the whole infrastructure without being constrained by management, and they provide industry recognized certificate as well. Now, internal audits are not certifying your solution and they are not certifying your setup. You cannot go to your customers or you cannot go to, even there is some kind of like data breach or some kind of offense you have done as an organization, you cannot showcase that you have done your due diligence by having an internal audit. It doesn't work like that. Internal auditors are not certified to give you some kind of like proof or some kind of certificate that you have followed all the guidelines. External auditors can give that certificate. So of course, after internal audits, you still need external audit at least once in a year, so you can have like nice industry recognized certifications. But of course, there are some challenges when we talk about cloud and virtualization. It's not really straightforward auditing a setup which is, like we discussed before, running anywhere into the world. You don't know where it is really located, where is the actual AWS or Azure data center where your data is stored. So there are some challenges around the assurance and auditing concept of cloud and virtualization based solutions, and it gets more complicated when we know that all the cloud applications are actually now multi-serviced, and you have different services running in as a different components. So instead of having a single server with your operating system and all the application deployed there, now we have kind of like a type 1 type 2 hypervisor, on top of which you have virtual machines. Inside virtual machines, sometimes you can even run the containers as well. So it all gets a lot complicated, and it of course impact the auditing as well. So if there is an auditor or someone is coming to do some kind of like audit check on your solution, what components need to be covered, who will be responsible for covering what particular concept. You don't want to be in a situation where you bring in the auditors, they come with a mindset of older monolith designs or older monolith applications, and only to realize that you actually have multiple components running in maybe Kubernetes running as a container. Then who will be auditing that? Whether they are actually the correct auditing team to review a solution if they don't even know what container is. So of course cloud actually adds a lot of complexity in terms of auditing itself. Now audits of course can create multiple kind of reports, but most commonly recognized reports are our service organization control or SOC reports. You might have heard SOC reports so many times. It was mentioned in CompTIA as well. I think during CCSP as well we mentioned it before. So I'm not going detail into different types of reports or how they are segregated, but still I'll give you a brief summary of what we have covered before. So there are three kinds of report: SOC 1, SOC 2 and SOC 3. Now SOC 1 covers controls with respect to financial reporting. So it covers all those information, all those solutions which are deployed as part of your current infrastructure, but from the viewpoint of a financial reporting. So it doesn't cover the real technical implementation details. SOC 2 is more detailed. It covers a lot of technical information, detailed design, detailed solution, high level, low level designs. Everything is covered as part of SOC 2. SOC 3 also cover the technical information, but it's not that detailed. It's kind of like an overview. So SOC 3 is not detailed. It's a generic information related to technical side of your things or technical kind of solutions which you have deployed. Now when we talk about auditing, scoping is really important. You really need to decide what is the scope of the audit. Now scope doesn't only mean that what kind of infrastructure or what kind of applications are covered as part of your audit. Of course that is one of the part. You cannot just bring in someone to audit your solution and without any information providing to them that what they actually have to audit, what kind of infrastructure or what kind of solution, what kind of application they have to review, and what kind of design they have to review. So scoping covers the extent of audit, but beside the extent, you also need to cover the objective, why you are having this audit at the first place. For example, if you are dealing with banking data, if you are dealing with financial information, you may be having this audit to compare it with PCI DSS guidelines. So that's the objective of this audit. You want to get your solution, you want to get your applications reviewed as per PCI DSS regulations. So that's your audit scope and your audit objective. You of course need to decide on the deliverables as well. What kind of reports you are expecting as at the end of this audit? What will be the timelines? Who and all will be informed part of this audit, and who and all will be responsible to display or to share the information when auditors come and check. So for example, if you in your organization you are having this audit exercise and you are bringing in auditors, either internal or external, to come and ask people questions around the solutions which they have designed, or how data encryption is happening, where the data is stored, how you are ensuring that only relevant people are accessing the information, how you have implemented role-based access control or other solution strategies around IAM. You need to ask these questions only from designated persons, and that's really important. You need to identify who to ask what information. That's one bit. Another bit is, as part of audit exercise, you can't disrupt the existing live function. So it's not like if you're auditing something, if you're auditing an application, and as part of that audit, you want to see, for example, live logs. And in order to view those logs, maybe you have to run some process which is not recommended during the daytime. Maybe that process only runs in the nighttime. You cannot, as part of audit, ask someone to run that process in the daytime because you as an auditor want this to see. That's not how it happens. Means you can ask them to showcase how it happens, you can ask them about solution design and document, but you cannot disrupt the exact live function which is really happening, and you cannot disrupt the business continuity. So audit scoping covers all these aspects. Audit exercise is really important, but it need to be well defined, it need to be well documented, and it need to be as least disruptive as it can be. And as part of audit, what you get is a nice audit document with all the observation and all the recommendation. You can easily use this documented output to compare with the standard guideline to create a gap analysis. Now, gap analysis is nothing but a comparison between your standard benchmarks and your real deployment and what is missing in between. So for example, if there is a recommendation that you have to use data encryption with ISO27018, but in reality you are using ISO27018, then of course there is a gap there. And as part of that gap analysis, what you have to do is you have to increase the encryption from 2048 to 4096. So that's one of the example of having this gap analysis. So it helps in documenting the gaps and of course preparing the rectification and improvement plan. And that's why gap analysis is something which is really important for any organization, because not only you want information on what kind of like differences you have and how you are deviated from the real benchmark or how you are not following the standards, but how you can improve that, how you can fill that gap, and how you can come at par to the benchmark or come at par to the standard, which of course make you more industry recognized, and which of course bring more and more customer trust in your solution and in your organization as well. So gap analysis is one of that activity. Alright, that's it for today's episode. I could have covered audit planning now itself as well, because it is kind of related to what we have covered just now, audit scoping and gap analysis. But this is something which we can cover in the next week episode as well. So in next week episode, we will be covering audit planning, internal information security management system, different kind of policies, how we can identify and involve different relevant stakeholders. So all in all, we will cover the whole audit process methodologies and subtopics around that. If time permits in the next week episode, then we will be covering implications of cloud to enterprise risk management as well, which include topics like regulatory transparency requirement, your SOX report, GDPR, risk treatment, different risk framework. And to be honest, it started with kind of like these all topics, and these all domain itself is kinda boring, but more I read about it, it's really getting interesting now. So I'm sure you guys must be liking it as well. It's not covering really the technical side of things, but those processes, those management, those auditing, those non-technical managerial stuff is really important as part of cloud security and as part of information security as well. So it's good time to cover these aspects as well, so we can have good overall knowledge of cloud security. Besides this, there is no new event coming locally in terms of like any cyber security or any relevant information around that. But if something comes up, I will be first to share with you guys, and you can of course check on my Twitter handle as well if there is some new information. Like I mentioned before, I am quite active there now as well. So if anything comes up, if I'm working on some new solutions, some really exciting stuff in my day job, I tend to share some information around that there as well. So it's really interesting out there, and if you have some questions, if you have some doubts, then of course reach me out. Alright, that's it for today's episode. Goodbye and good luck.
Thank you for listening to Get Certified Together. If you loved our content, then please like and subscribe from your favorite podcast platform, so you don't miss the notification for our next episodes and announcements.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.